Furina and Xilonen are two of the strongest buffers in all of Genshin Impact, and they're rerunning back-to-back, Furina in the following days, and Xilonen just one patch later, if speculations are to be believed. So in this video, we're going to talk about the power and upsides of each character, as well as talk about if each DPS needs which one of these units to help you decide which one you should prioritize for your account. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. We are closing in on 100,000 subscribers, so if you want to show your support, it would really help out the channel. If you subscribe, thanks a lot. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is I've basically just laid out what each character does going by each column here. So we're talking about damage, damage bonus, resistance shred, elemental application, restrictions, quality of life, and vertical investment potential. For damage, Furina is the only one of the two, of course, that does damage. She has excellent sub DPS potential, very similar to Xilonen, some of the highest sub DPS potential in the entire game. Obviously, Xilonen does not offer any damage, but we have to continue looking at what they offer. Both of them share big similarities in that they give a lot of elemental damage bonus to their entire team. With a single healer, a single target healer, such as Bennett or Xilonen, Furina will give an average of a 45% damage bonus buff, up to a 65% damage buff for most healers, including team-wide healers. Obviously, it does cap out at 75, but 65 is what you're mostly going to be getting on average. And keeping in mind that if you do go for her C1, which a lot of people do, you get 37.5% before any healing at all at Constellation 1, which is just like an extra goblet's worth attached to all of your characters that are doing damage, which is absolutely huge. Xilonen, on the other hand, gives a 40% damage bonus buff just with the scroll artifact set. That's actually pretty fantastic. And so you can see like 20% is a pretty substantial bonus, but you can see why it's not worth like losing your Bennett to use a Charlotte for a 20% damage bonus increase. Just getting the 45% from either Xilonen or Bennett is very much worth it all on its own. So yeah, resistance shred is the next factor. So Furina obviously doesn't give any resistance shred, whereas Xilonen is giving 36% resistance shred for the reactable elements on the team. That's the other thing. Furina's buff is unconditional to all of your party, whereas Xilonen needs to react and create a crystallize if you want her to give a damage bonus. Something to keep in mind. But she also gives a 36% resistance shred. Keep in mind that resistance shred is extremely valuable the more resistance enemies have. Some of them start at 0, some of them start at plus 50 or whatever. If they have a lot of resistance shred, if they have above 0, it's twice as effective as if they have 0 or below 0. And so multiple sources of resistance shred on one team lose value. So if you're using Kazuha and Xilonen, you get less value from resistance shred than if you just have one or the other. Same with Citlali plus Xilonen. So yeah, that's that. Furina has very useful elemental application. Providing Hydro allows you to create Vaporize, Hyper Bloom, or Bloom for Hyper Bloom, Electrocharge, and just generally good for reacting. Xilonen creates Crystallize, which basically doesn't do much except for activate her set and some stuff for Navia. So generally not as useful, obviously, as Furina. For restrictions, Furina obviously needs a healer of some kind. I don't have this read because I don't think this is that bad of a restriction. Most teams are going to be running Bennett or Xilonen or some other healer. Not as many teams are not running a healer these days. If we get some really insane shielders and people stop running Bennett, then Furina I could see her losing some value. But right now, because even if teams don't run a healer, they're usually running Bennett. Or if they're not running Bennett, they're running Xilonen. So basically, there's a healer by default on almost every team. So Furina ends up getting basically a pass. This basically isn't even a restriction. It basically doesn't matter. You do lose some Bennett. I will say you lose some Bennett uptime to heal your team. That can be annoying. Xilonen does need to react with the buffable element, so she doesn't work on certain teams that can't react with Geo, and she needs to actually get the Crystallize to do the scroll buff. Something to keep in mind. But they both also have really good quality of life. Furina has damage that lasts a long time and follows you around anywhere you go. And of course, it's team-wide buffing, which we talked about. Shilonen's buff applies to all the enemies on the field, even if you just react on one, as opposed to something like Kazuha or Sucrose. And she also gives a team-wide buff and also applies in multi-wave. Furina is in a sense in multi-wave as well, because her her thing just lasts a long time. So great. Both of them have excellent quality of life, and that's awesome. And for vertical investment, Furina has an incredibly good C1 and C2. We've already talked about the C1, and then the increase to her C2 is basically just as good as the C1 increase. Very excellent. Xilonen has a good R1, a bad C1, and a good C2. Overall, I would say Furina has definitely the better vertical investment path, but Xilonen's is still quite good. Her C2 isn't completely universal, the way that Furina's C1 and C2 both pretty much are, but at least her weapon is pretty much universal. So now we've looked at what they do, but we kind of need some context with the actual teams that they're good for to figure out which one's worth it for you. Because if you just look at this sheet, that's not going to tell you which one's worth it. We'll need to look at that, and this will be on Tactor if you want. So I've basically made this list: characters that really need Furina, characters that really need Xilonen, then characters that need both. And we'll go through each DPS, and you can decide, whether or not it's worth it for you. So Sino's best team really needs Furina. Using Furina without Sino is just asking for trouble. I do not like it at all. So if you main Sino, I highly recommend getting Furina. And Sino's damage is a bit low for today's DPS standards, so I would highly recommend going for Constellations on your Furina, both to help out Sino's damage and add some extra personal Furina damage. I have done some Xilonen teams as well, and I'm not sure whether I like Sino with Xilonen better, or with Kuki, or with Baiju, or what I really like. So I'll let some Sino mains talk in the comments. I will test that more in the future, but for now, I feel most comfortable just recommending Furina. Wanderer, he's definitely not as reliant as Sino on Furina, but to get really great damage out of Wanderer, I highly recommend Furina, and going for Constellations is a good idea as well. Similar case for Linny, I would say even less reliant. There's some Chevreuse stuff that some people like to do, but Furina is present on most of his teams, especially, again, going for C1. Furina is basically the only character that I could get Mizuki to do anything with that she was actually on field driving. Like, of course, there's Moika Melt stuff, but even though I didn't love the team, it was still Mizuki's best thing, so highly recommend Furina for Mizuki enjoyers. Similar thing with Eula, very hard to clear with, but Furina is by far the best buffer that you can have for Eula, so definitely need to get Furina if you want to max out Eula. And of course, you don't need to get anyone, right? This is if you want to have the best shot at clearing the Abyss, getting good clears, maxing out your characters. I recommend first pulling on the DPSs and characters that you like, and second of all, pulling on, supports or whatever to support the characters you like. That's basically it. None of these are meta recommendations. It's just if you want to maximize Eula, if you love Eula, I do recommend getting Furina for her. Same with Ido. The Furina stuff is still just the best. And then Zhao, Furina has such good synergy with Shenhe, and so does Xiao. And then you throw Farzan in there, and especially as you're getting like the Zhao team at Constellation 0 Shenhe and Constellation 0 Furina is like, I find it a bit underwhelming. But once you start getting C1 Furina, C2 Furina, C2 Shenhe, now Zhao is really popping off and doing some serious damage. And so that's the investment path you want to take Zhao down. If you want to maximize him, you forget about him and his constellations and his weapons, and you focus on Furina and Shenhe that buff the ever-living crap out of your Zhao and make him really good. I put Chaska and Alhaitham in Furina medium because Chaska's best non-Moika team uses Furina, and Alhaitham's best team overall does use Furina, but a lot of people still prefer Yelan or even Xingqiu. The difference for both of these characters starts mattering, again, a lot greater with Furina C1 and C2. I'm a broken record saying it because it is so good and it's so early. So many people have Furina C1 or C2 or plan on getting it. I don't have it. All of my perspective for this video comes from just being a C0 Furina haver, but it really does make a big difference for things like this. So these are characters that I kind of don't really recommend Furina as much unless you're going for like C1 Furina, and then it makes a lot more sense. It's still worth it to get Furina for them at C0, but it's more worth it when you start looking at constellations. And Chaska, I feel like with Chaska, that she's going to get a better teammate than Furina at some point. We'll see when or who it is, or even if that ever happens. I think also just like Chaska constellations are better. And then once you start getting Chaska constellations, then you start really liking Moika better. So I hesitate to even put Chaska on this list as much, but Alhaitham definitely should be. So next for Xilonen, who really wants Xilonen? Well, Mualani, you can use Furina with Mualani, but it's not like nearly as much of a recommendation. But I would like Xilonen is a massive buff to Mualani, so that's good. Same with Navia. Both of these characters just really, really pop off with Xilonen. And it really, yeah, they're one of them. It's one of the main recommended characters for them. Ganyu and Wriothesley, technically, they're both better used as Moeka melt enablers, where Moeka is the one doing the melting. But I know that people don't actually want to do that. You want your Ganyu to deal damage. You want your Wriothesley to do damage. And in that case, Xilonen is going to be a priority to buff the cryo damage. Very important to have Xilonen to buff the cryo damage. If you're using them as Moeka supports, then you don't need Xilonen. But I feel like most people who play Ganyu and Wriothesley don't want to use them as Moeka supports. So that's why I have them in Xilonen high. For Xilonen medium, we have Moeka, Arlecchino, and Gaming. A lot of people have the misconception that Moeka really needs Xilonen, and it's just simply not true. She does so much damage, and Xilonen isn't even crazy synergistic with her because Citlali already gives her most of what she needs. That running something like Diona is very, very much serviceable, and or even Sucrose. Not as good as Xilonen, hence why it's Xilonen medium, but they're still here. In addition, it's looking like Iansin will be better for Moeka and Arlecchino. Everything I'm saying about Moeka basically applies to Arlecchino as well. But yeah, you'll be able to replace Xilonen for Iansin. Even C2 Iansin should outpace Xilonen at C0. Of course, we'll have to test it first, but I wouldn't like recommend, it's fairly, Xilonen's a bit lower on the priority list for Moeka and Arlecchino than someone like Citlali, who is a much more important support. And similar thing for Gaming, except Gaming also has the option to go for Shanyun. I've been getting a bit better clears with Xilonen than with Shanyun, but it's pretty close. You can kind of go for either. They both have some pros and cons. Now for the characters that want both Furina and Xilonen, because I bet you've been noticing there's been a distinct lack of Neuvillette on this list. Neuvillette really, really wants both. It's not like he needs both to be good, but he really, really wants both. Ito also really wants both for his best teams. He actually wants Xilonen Constellation 2, but I digress. And Hu Tao really, really wants both as well. I have both medium, Raiden, Chlorand, and Ayaka. You could put both high for Ayaka. I'm not really sure. I think once you start looking at Furina C1, Furina C2, then Ayaka's value and performance with Furina really, really shoots up. I found personally that the Kokomi Shenhe clears were fairly close to the Xilonen ones, that I'm not just wanting to shoot it up into high immediately. And Xilonen Furina does have higher single target damage, but that doesn't have the grouping. But grouping isn't that good in most abysses, so it's like, how well do you rate it? I don't really know exactly. So we've got it. I'll put it in high, but I'm not really super sold. And again, this is for Ayaka carry. If we're looking at Ayaka's best team, it's Ayaka as a replacement for Citlali as melt support for Xilonen, which does work really well, but you know, it's not what people want to use their Ayaka for. Although I really like doing it, but it's okay. You could argue Raiden being in high because there's a lot. Raiden basically has two good teams, if you're asking me. One is Furina, Yolan, Xilonen, and one is Raiden, Chevreuse, blank blank. I've been getting the best results with Auroran Moeka and probably Iansin Moeka in the future here. I'm gonna put Raiden in medium. I'm gonna leave her there because I really like the Chevreuse teams. I generally get better results with Chevreuse, but I am a C2 Raiden owner. If you're a C0 Raiden owner or if you're going for constellations on Furina and or Yolan, then it basically just depends on where you put your investment. Are you putting your investment in your Raiden, or is it in Furina and Yolan? If it's in your Raiden, then you want Chevreuse, and if it's in your Furina and Yolan, then that's where you want to go. So it's kind of just pick your poison with your Raiden, which road you want to go down. Both roads are good, and I think lots of Raiden owners should have both. Right? If you really want to main Raiden, you want both teams in case there's a Hydro check or in case there's not a Hydro check, and then you can choose which one you want. So maybe I don't know. I don't know what I want to do. Chlorand, I feel like I would leave in both medium. I definitely think that that the Chevreuse stuff is way better for Chlorand than otherwise. I really would not recommend getting Furina or Xilonen for your Chlorand. That's one of the best parts about Chlorand, is that she lets your other DPS, who, let's be real, a ton of them want Furina or Xilonen or both. And Chlorand says, hey, I just need Chevreuse. You do you, boo, and I'll take Chevreuse and go ahead. You can have your Bennett, Furina, Xilonen, whatever you want. Have fun. And then neither, we've got Childe, of course, doesn't work with them. Keqing, whereas Keqing can use Furina, especially at C1, if you have Furina for him, but I would never recommend wishing for Furina for Keqing. You should get Emily. And pretty much same with Nilou. There's some good Nilou Furina stuff, but I would never recommend wishing Furina for Nilou. So that is basically the list. I'll put this on Tactor. So who should you get? Should you get Xilonen or Furina? Should you try it for both? Should you get constellations? Hopefully this video helped you clarify, and if you're still having trouble, come join the Discord down below. Our helpers are super helpful and they can help you decide which one you want. So let me know any thoughts you have. Let me know why I'm wrong. Please subscribe once again. And if you don't want to do any of that, that is totally fine. Just watching the video has been more than enough. Thanks so much. Bye for now.
Time for a test drive. Got a few tricks on my sleeves, yeah. Others on my squeeze, easily freeze, yeah. I'm make sure don't need no teaser. It's a trick, yeah, you should check a meter. I lost a week or two when you got no idea what to do. Always on my mark, no time to accuse. Shining lights on me, the stage is not for you.